You have officially entered into the first ever offseason with the Volatile Podcast. You thought the baseball team was going to let you enjoy them in the month of June? Wrong. The entire months of June and July, the Volatile Podcast will be here to keep you entertained and informed through the dark days of summer. We will be here to remind you that being a Tennessee Volunteers fan is a terminal diagnosis that we all share. I'm Mac Williams, and I'm joined by Nick Duncan. And for the very first time since March 27th, Joe Davis. Joe, how are we doing tonight, man?
Oh, boys, it's good to be back. I'm glad to share in the sorrows of being a Vols fan with you all tonight.
Well, that's good.
Nick, how are you doing,
bud? I'm not doing great. I mean, I'm at an undisclosed location in the South Carolina Low Country, and the fact that there's an ocean not very far away that I can go enjoy tomorrow morning is the only thing keeping me from driving off of a cliff. So. So to Joe's point, it's good that he's here to wallow in the sorrow with us because that's all there is darkness and death. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, Nick, I mean, don't get too into it because we'll talk about it, but you obviously were the most optimistic and had the most, the most maybe realistic or like tamped down expectations for this team compared to at least Jeff and I. So just give me a brief overview of how you're feeling right now.
I am feeling, I'm not feeling good. To avoid saying things on this podcast that I probably shouldn't. The scriptures say not to give full vent to your emotions, and I'm trying to hear that right now because I'm not feeling good.
Wow, what piety you have.
It's dark, boys. I've not been in a good place this last week because you are right. I did have the most tamped down expectations, but I also felt like even with my lesser preseason expectations, I was probably the highest, most consistently on the team.
Yes.
and legitimately thought we were going to win this regional. And I should have known that we wouldn't because I thought we would, because that's what Tennessee does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You never learn, do you?
I never learn.
That's what we love about you.
I never learn. I just can't, boys. I just can't do it. I just love it too much.
Yeah, you're a slave to your vices, like Brendan Sorsby.
I am. That's so true. I have a lot in common with Brendan Sorsby. Yeah.
Oh me. Well, I didn't have anything on the podcast outline tonight for general like football news, baseball or basketball news. Anybody have anything football or basketball news wise?
I mean, football, I guess we should last time we talked about Chaz and I guess it's true that I don't know what's true, man. He's made it to campus. Right. Jeff had shared a report that possibly he was let go.
Right.
And
then he said, right.
Yeah, but then like apparently that was debunked, and then I saw Austin Price wrote up an article about like what's true and what's not, trying to like get through everything, but it's behind a paywall, so I don't know what he said because I don't subscribe.
Yeah. And we will not be paying for that, Austin.
We will not, because it just means we'll find out a week later than everybody else for free. So
right, exactly.
I'll get on Trusty Vol Nation, which is free. And someone will post and say, this is what they're saying on TOS, which is the other site. So,
yep, there you go. That's how you know we're common fans here. We are also too cheap to pay for any of those paywalls.
We don't want it.
No, we do not. We
don't need it.
I'll just wait till the Knoxville News Sentinel writes an article.
That's right.
All right. Well, on to baseball. Latest news.
He's so on to baseball. Latest news: we lost.
Yeah. Well,
latest news: the season is over, and we'll see you. We'll see you in 3 months, listener.
Exactly. No, the season comes to an end with 2 straight regional losses. The news here is that this is the first time in program history that Tennessee has gone 0-2 in a regional. So Tennessee has never before made a regional and not won a game. That's the other way to phrase that. Other latest news. This is actually pretty big
At
news.
least we lost to high quality opponents like Virginia Commonwealth.
Oh my gosh, you're sick. Yeah, transfer portal losses. Everybody are Jay Abernathy, Ariel Antigua, Chris Newstrom, Braden Krenzel. Those are kind of the big names, and there's also some other names. Hunter High, famous around these parts because his brother played at Tennessee Tech. Finley Bates, Evan Hankins, and Ethan Moore. So those are your transfer portal losses, unless there's been another one added since the last I saw.
Yeah, I haven't seen any.
Okay, so those are the big ones. I mean, obviously, like I said, big names: Jay, Ariel, Chris. Krenzel, I wouldn't say necessarily a big name, just because he was so bad this year.
He's been a big name on this pod.
That's true. That is true. We've given him a lot of screen time here. And the last bit of transfer portal news is that Cam Appenzeller is not entering the transfer portal. He is staying at Tennessee, which is huge news.
Shocked.
Glad to have him back, though, right?
They must have dropped the bag on that boy because there's no reason to stay.
Yeah, had
to. Only thing that makes sense. I don't even care. I don't care. Pay the man.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, him and Landon Mack, whatever his story is going to be, are your best two prospects that are returning.
Yeah.
I mean,
Landon Mack confirmed he's coming back, right?
Oh, he did?
Yes, I do believe that's true.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, is he going to pitch, though, or is he still going to be hurt for another year?
I cannot. Last I heard, he's day to day. So
we're gonna get to February next year, and Elander's gonna be like, "Yeah, Landon Mack's day to day." We're like, "It's been a year."
He's been day to day for the last 9 months.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. So Nick already said it, but the baseball season comes to an end at the hands of East Carolina and Virginia Commonwealth, just like everyone predicted. That's how our season would come to an end.
It's always nice when you go out losing to at least whoever won the regional to move on to the super. So
Tennessee lost to the two teams who lost to the team that won the regional.
Oh, so that's right.
That's all.
God,
that's always good.
That.
That's
I'm
always
gonna go
good
drink
news.
some bleach now. See you guys later.
Oh gosh. All right. Well, let's just start. Let's just lead off the podcast, the baseball discussion, with the obvious question. Joe, let's start with you since it's been a little bit, and I know that you're well read on the subject. Did Elander's decision to mix up the rotation lose you the regional?
I mean, yeah, I think so. It's difficult to quantify some of these things, and it's especially hard because Blanco had a great outing, right, on that first start, and so I think it would be easy to say, well, the offense just underperformed. I think going into that second game, they were like 1 for 14 with runners in scoring position, something like that. I mean. So there's very clear and obvious problems, but when you're going into a regional and you're not starting your best guy, you're communicating things to the team, and it changes the dynamic. And it's hard to think sitting here. I don't know, man. I'll tell you, it's hard to think sitting here. I'll just say, period. It's just hard to think sitting here right now because this team is so.
Don't think, just feel. Just feel.
I don't know what to do with this team, right? Reflecting back on this team, how does a team that struggled all throughout the season to kind of find their identity, beat Texas, and then lose this badly in the regional? How does that happen, right? How do you kind of try to square that kind of inconsistency in your head? And I think not starting your best guy, day one, Friday night. That is explanatory to me. How does a team not get ready, not be prepared, not be locked in? I think that's contributory.
Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you and I were saying it last week that Coons was their best. I think you go with your best on the first night. We've been saying all year long you got to win on Friday, and I'll let you speak more to because I think you have already, to me, articulated well the mindset shift that could possibly happen from throwing Blanco over Coons. But I will just say that I think you communicate something to your team about the opponent you're playing when you don't throw your best. And I'll let you speak to that more. But I mean, the thing I'll say is, I think I said this on the last pod, but throwing Blanco was high risk, high reward. So it's high reward if you win because now you've got Coons against North Carolina. But the problem with throwing Blanco is that you open yourself up to the worst case scenario, which is exactly what happened. You went 14 innings, you lost the game, and you threw 3 of your best 4 arms. And I know those guys can come back and throw again. But this team's not been good with their back up against the wall this year. And you opened yourself up to that. And so if you throw Coons and you still lose that ball game in 14, I just think you feel like, I mean, we threw our best and we're just not good enough. But you just set yourself up for failure. This team is not the Tony Vitello teams of the last 5 or 6 years. And if Tony had done something like that when our pitching staff and bullpen were chock full of talent, I think that's one thing. But with a team like this, you do not have the wealth of resources that you've had in the past. So you can't take a chance on blowing them all the first game of the tournament and then having to throw your best guy against the 4 seed in the losers bracket. And then you're going into that game with a mindset now too that's not good. So it was just so ultimately, I don't know if it lost us the regional, but it definitely did not set us up to win the regional. I think that your best chance to win the regional obviously was with Coons. So
yeah, so you guys both touched on it really well. Did it lose you the regional? This is a tough question to answer. Obviously, there's different parts to it. At the end of the day, everyone's already said, all the people that you might listen to on other podcasts have already said, pitchers didn't lose you the weekend. The decision to start Blanco didn't lose you the weekend because you hit so bad. And I think that's true, ultimately. Like you could have hit well enough to make that decision not matter. That's possible. I think the issue that I take with this decision and the reason why I lean towards saying, yes, it lost you the regional, and this is what you're not hearing on any other podcast, is that you guys have already kind of said it, which is that when you make a decision like this, when you make any decision, it communicates to everyone around you what you think, right? It communicates something that you might not even be intending for it to, but it does communicate something. And so when Josh Elander decides, hey, we're throwing Evan Blanco, every player on the team knows Tegan Coons is the best pitcher on this team. So if Josh Elander, if our coach is deciding that we're not throwing our best player, that must mean that we don't need to throw our best player. Why don't we need to throw our best player? Well, because this team's not very good. And so you cannot escape the fact that you have communicated to your team that they don't need their best to win. That's what you've communicated. And that could be fine if your team is full of old guys who are fierce competitors, as in every Tennessee team for the last 4 years. If you do make that decision with any other Tennessee team over the last 4 years, I should say last 4 years before last year. So 21, 22, 23, and probably 2020, though we didn't get to see a full season. If you do that with any of those teams, it's probably fine because you have a bunch of guys who are old, mature, really like strong competitors, have great mindsets. They don't let that stuff affect them and how they play. Right. The problem I have with it is that this team showed all year that they're not mentally tough, that they're not mature, that they're not great competitors. So this team needed to be coached in a different way. They needed to see Elander say through his decision, hey, we're putting our best guy out there on Friday. Who gives a damn about Saturday? Because we have to win game 1. Everybody was saying, we included, we're saying you've got to win you've got to be in the winner's bracket on Sunday. If you're not in the winner's bracket on Sunday, you're not going to make it out of the regional. Well, guys, if you're going to make it to the winner's bracket on Sunday, you have to win Friday. You have to win Saturday. So I get that. I get the strategy behind saving him for Saturday and trying to put your best pitcher against the best team. But the problem with that is you're not ever guaranteed tomorrow. You're not guaranteed the winner's bracket on Saturday if you don't win Friday. And everyone knows that. It's obvious. That's not some breaking news. But Josh Elander did not coach as if Friday was important. He coached as if Saturday was important,
Yep.
and that bit you on Friday.
And the thing
And
we haven't said too, which is also true, is that it also communicates something to the team that you're playing.
Yes.
They probably ECU. I mean, I don't know. The players may know the difference in Coons and Blanco, but I guarantee you the coaching staff does.
Mm-hmm.
And so their skipper's walking into the locker room, while they're warming up for the regional, and they're saying, "Boys, they don't think you can beat their second best guy."
Yep.
Like they're saving their ace for Saturday because they think they're going to walk right past you. It's just like when you intentionally walk a guy, your coach your coach Mac probably would say the same thing I did. It's a slap in the face of the guy that's on the dugout. Go out there and make him pay for it.
Yep.
And it's the same thing. It's like an intentional walk. Like you're saying they don't care about you because they're just looking to North Carolina and make them eat it. And they did. So.
Yep. Yeah, I mean it's unnecessary bulletin board material. I mean, you handed it to them and they made you pay for it. So I actually think that and we'll get into some of the more finer details. Well, we should just go ahead. So, like, Joe, you made a good point when we talked recently about one of the finer details. I'll let you talk about it. I'll jog your memory if you don't remember. But, when you make this decision and you go into that Friday game and everyone's in the back of their mind thinking, we don't need our best performance to win, it leads you into what we saw on Friday, which is the hitters just don't quite look as sharp. I didn't get to watch the game because I was at work Friday. I was, trying to keep up with it as much as I could. What I saw during my lunch break, the limited I got to watch, I didn't think the at-bats looked very good. I talked to Joe later that day, and Joe, you kind of said that you thought we were hitting the ball hard and whatnot. I went back and rewatched it, and I just really, truly did not come away thinking the same thing, Joe. I really thought that our at-bats didn't actually look that good. I just thought we did not hit the ball as well as I expected this team to, as well as they showed that they could down the stretch. And obviously hitting was a huge problem the whole weekend. So, but I think that started on Friday because of the mentality that the team, whether they even knew they had it or not, it was there. You could tell that they did not feel like this game was urgent, like that they had to go win it. And I think that starts with this decision Elander made. And then, Joe, you pointed out another problem that you noticed. Do you remember what that was that you said to me?
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about mentality.
Yeah, the mental
right?
mistakes. Exactly.
Mental mistakes. I mean, the doubling up on third with Reese, right? Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling to me that in that situation you got the go-ahead run, right? It was a go-ahead run at that point on third base, 90 feet away from home plate. And infield is in because they only got one out, and you're way off the bag and you're running on contact. And what you gotta wait. You gotta wait to see that ball gets through or not.
He was running like it was 2 outs, and
he's running like it's 2 outs.
If it's a ground ball in front of them, you're not scoring.
Right.
And so all you got to do is stand on the bag because if it gets through, you're walking home.
If it gets through, you're walking to home plate.
There's no reason to be off the bag.
You don't need to be off the bag. It's absolutely mind-boggling. The more the more you just kind of think about the situation and the mistake. And so again, what causes that, right? And so Mac, I think you hit on it. You've hit on it the best, which is, this team, you got to coach the team that you have, not the team that you wish you had, that you had in yesteryear. You got to coach these guys. You got to put these guys in the best position to win. And these guys they're young. They have no grit. They had no identity, right? They have shown themselves to be sort of very lukewarm or really sort of spectrum competitors. They were either really hot or they were really cold. They were, never, no consistency. And so, okay, so you got all that. You got all this data from the year, and how are you not coaching up your guy to know the situation and kind of know what's expected of you? Not starting Coons and the kind of mental shift that puts on the team could be explanatory for that kind of a gaffe. and which ended up costing you the game, right? Because if he scores there, it's just a different game. It's a totally different game. And
well, you put all the pressure on ECU at that point, and that's they never put pressure on ECU. It always felt like the pressure was on us because it was.
Sure. Yeah, because it was. And we know that the pitching staff could hold ECU. We went 14 innings, right? So you know that
you you didn't throw your best guy. You went 14 innings and you didn't throw your best guy. So clearly you could hang with them.
Right. So I just I think the Reese Chapman. There were a couple of others.
That was the most egregious.
Ford had an error too. I think if I remember correctly.
He kicked a ground ball.
Yeah. So that maybe is more just playing baseball stuff, but the Reese Chapman thing, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else. I'll tell you that. I guess I'll say it this way. I don't know how else to explain that bad of a gaffe.
Yep.
Without the Kuntz piece, right?
Yeah.
Because the flip side of the coin is he just is that bad. He's just that bad. Right. I don't think he's that bad of a player. I really don't.
Yeah, you're talking about Reese making that mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Reese is probably one of the most mature guys on the roster, right? Like Reese literally won a World Series with this team, so like Reese, and he hit a home run in Omaha against North Carolina, so like Reese has been there. Like I do want to, so two things. One, thinking about this subject, Joe, you mentioned kind of like how this team, they were inconsistent in terms of obviously not just their play, but like their intensity or their mentality or whatever, and Stone Lawless after the regional in one of his interviews that he did, he basically said as much in the sense that he said, talking about in the context of the quote, it was like in the context of the leaders. So like him and Reese and maybe a couple of transfer guys, whoever, but mainly him and Reese should have done more to be more vocal leaders. He basically said like they didn't do enough to help set people straight in terms of like, hey, this is what it means to play baseball at Tennessee. This is what it looks like to play for the best team in the last 5 years. And he said, we didn't do enough to do that, which, first of all, I appreciate like the honesty and like, you hear that and you're like, well, I hope that means that he's going to correct it for next year. And he said that they were going to do better. But also it's like, why didn't you? Like when you start looking around the locker room and you see guys doing whatever that means that they're not doing that you think they should be doing, why weren't you saying something? Why weren't you being vocal? I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, it has to be fixed or else you're going to run into the same problems next year, especially because you're going to have to import a brand new team in a lot of ways. So it's like you're going to have to, at some point, hold people accountable to what it means to play at Tennessee's newfound standard of baseball. So I was like, in one sense, I was happy to hear that. In the other sense, I was like, why weren't you doing it already? The second thing I was going to say was that – oh, shoot, I'm blanking. So I wanted to push back on something you guys said. You were talking about the situation where Reese was on third and the infield was in, and you were saying something about staying on the bag. Nick, let me ask you, like, when you mean staying on the bag, like, obviously, I guess my pushback here is, like, I want you to clarify, because obviously I think he should have had a lead, and I also think he should have got a secondary lead. My issue with the play was that he didn't freeze on the line drive when the ball was hit. Not that he had a lead, not that he had a secondary lead. Yeah. Because obviously I think that you should be doing both of those things in case there's a pass ball in that situation. And I'm sure you agree, but I just wanted you to clarify.
Yeah. So if it's clearly not going to be in the grass, and it's not, if it's a line drive, you gotta freeze on the line drive and you got to get back to the bag is what I'm saying. He should have been standing on third. Because
okay, I see. So it's after the secondary lead that you had an issue.
Yeah. Because if it's a line drive, as soon as you see it's a line drive, the possibilities are he's catching it or it's going to go out into the grass. And if it goes out into the grass, you're just walking home.
Right.
So you don't need to be getting super far down the line. You need to be at that point heading back to third base.
Right. Yeah.
Like there's just no reason to be out there.
Right. It's lead, it's secondary when you see the pitcher going home, and then as soon as the contact's made, you're in that situation, whether it's on the ground, in the air, line drive, in that situation, because the infield, you should be freezing until you see what happens, with the play. Now, obviously, in Reese's defense, if the coaches had told him we're going on contact on a ground ball. Like if they told him, hey, on the ground, we're going no matter what. We're going to try and make them make a play.
Sure.
I get that he was aggressive, but it wasn't on the ground pretty clearly, Now, I did hear somebody say, gosh, I think it was Ben. Help me.
Ben McKee.
Ben McKee, thank you. I think it was Ben McKee. I think he said, because it was Blaine Brown that hit that line drive, right?
I don't remember.
I think it was. I think he said that ball would have just been a routine ground ball to the second baseman had they not been playing in. But because they were playing in, he ended up catching it in the air. So I guess it's possible that if you had 1,000 reps at a lead and a secondary from third, when you see the ball at that trajectory coming off the bat, you're used to seeing that as a ground ball because infielders aren't always playing in.
Sure.
So in his defense, I guess that's a possible explanation. But again, given the circumstances, given your experience, you have to be more conservative in that situation versus less because there is only one out. And if the second baseman is playing in normal depth, even if you wait to see that ball bounce once at the edge of what traditionally would be the dirt and where the grass and dirt meet on the front of the infield rather than the back, if you wait till you see the ball land there, you're still going to beat the throw home if you've had a good secondary. So I think it's a dumb excuse, but that's just playing devil's advocate of what he might have saw.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. With all the clarifications, sounds like we're all agreed, though. It's just a total gaffe, and hard not to think that the Coons decision affected that. Before we move on to the next point here, which is the look back, can I throw a question out here for you guys?
Please.
So, or maybe this is the beginning of the look back.
Sure.
But where are you at with Elander managing this team?
From this weekend or moving forward?
Taking this weekend into account, reflecting on the whole year, moving forward, where are you at with Elander?
Well, obviously, I don't feel great. I think he outcoached himself in the regional, so I don't think that bodes well for. I think if you take the sample size from what we have, which I grant is not a lot, it's one season, but if you take the sample size of coaching that we have, Elander's not going to have a job for very long. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, he's got another year, maybe two, and he's going to be gone if he keeps coaching like this. I mean, that's point blank. Now, do I think that this year is fully representative of how good of a coach he will be? No. Do I want to fire him now? No. Would I trade him for Tony Vitello at the end of the MLB season if the Giants get rid of him? Abso-friggin-lutely.
Nick?
100%. I feel very similar. I do not feel great about the in-game coaching decisions. I think Josh Elander definitely knows baseball. I think Josh Elander definitely has the ability to be a good college baseball coach. I think that Josh Elander is smart enough. I would like to think and hope that he's smart enough to look back on this season and make adjustments to his coaching. And I'm willing to say that it's difficult to inherit a program like he inherited and to take a team that's not as good as the teams that he's been the assistant coach of and be able to figure out midstream that they need to be coached different than the teams that he's had. He's a good recruiter. I think he knows baseball. I think he'll be okay. But if he does this for another year or two, I'm like, Mac, he won't have a job. And I want him to be successful. I wanted them to hire him. And I think he can be. I hope he will be. But I'm not like totally out on him. I'm willing to say it was a rough first season. They did not play up to their potential with the talent that they had. And I'm willing to just say that it makes sense that you would take a step back. I see it as similar. I'm not making this comparison to say that like Vitello is the Nick Saban of baseball, because obviously like he didn't win multiple championships and all that stuff like Saban did. But I think it's similar to like Kalen DeBoer. Like Bama fans have been wanting to fire Kalen DeBoer at some point pretty much every season since he's been there. And I think it's pretty obvious that Kalen DeBoer is a good football coach if they'll give him time. But like he took over for an incredible, like arguably the best
greatest
ever,
coach of all time,
right? Probably the best college football coach ever.
Yeah,
not probably.
And so you just like they're going to take a step back. You have to give them time. And so I think it's something similar. I hope it's similar in that I do think Josh Elander's a good baseball coach, and it just makes sense to me that it would take him time to figure that out and that they wouldn't be as good. But all that being said, objectively, this team did not reach their potential, I think, because of coaching.
So let me say that I agree with the general points. Let me put a little bit of teeth on it. So here's my biggest concern with Elander, kind of with a year in review, is do we have another guy who's running a Tennessee athletics program who, one, doesn't know how to get the best out of his guys? He knows how to identify and bring in talent, but doesn't know how to maximize that talent. And then two, is too much of a player's coach and therefore leads to, locker room, off the field kind of problems.
There's no bad guy.
Which the lawless comment kind of makes me think, right? I don't want to read too much into what he's saying there, but if he's saying like we should have been more vocal, that seems to indicate that there was behaviors or at least unmet expectations in the locker room. Why isn't Elander solving that problem? So just to put some teeth on it, do we have essentially now two guys running our two best or our two most I don't know, basketball's probably still more popular, but two of our three big popular athletic programs here that are basically have the same problems. Am I crazy? Am I blackpilling?
No, you're not crazy. That's super possible.
The way that question started, I thought you were asking, is there another coach on campus like that? And I thought that was some kind of a sick joke. Because I was like, of course there's someone else on campus like that. What are you talking about?
To boil it down, is Josh Elander also like Josh Heupel?
Based on what we have so far, it seems like the thing that's so crazy about Josh Heupel and you don't know what to do with is guys like Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt. It's like, what do I do with – I mean, even like – I don't know. Do you put Dylan Sampson in that group? I mean, if Nico has another terrible year, like, did he get the most that you could have got out of Nico? Like, I don't know. Like, it seems like Josh Heupel has some guys that he's gotten a lot out of, but also it's like, was that just lightning in a bottle? Was it because those guys just overcame their own issues and did it themselves? Yeah. I don't know.
Self-motivated, or does Heupel connect with a certain personality type and those guys have it? But when the guys are real rowdy, he can't settle them down, and those guys just weren't rowdy. I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, I think I think that's an option, Joe, and I think it's hard to say it's not the most likely option. I think another possible option is that Josh Elander has coached so many of these teams. Vitello obviously built a culture that I think just started self-perpetuating, so that he probably wasn't having to do a lot of motivating because there were just guys kind of year to year that became the leaders and took over. Like, I don't suspect that Tony Vitello walked into the locker room and was like, all right, Drew Gilbert, you're the leader on this team this year. And then next year it was like, Blake Burke, you're the leader on this team. I think that the culture just kind of self-perpetuated that. I think what I hope is that Elander will realize, okay, that kind of thing doesn't just continue to self-perpetuate. I'm a new coach. It's a new culture. I have to start that again and keep it going and cultivate it. So,
but to your point, though, I also think that Tony Vitello did do that work you're talking about, where he probably walked in and said, he probably didn't say, you're the leader on this team, but Tony Vitello was the leader of the team. He set the culture with how he acted. And you see that in like the 2018, 2019 seasons where he weren't as good, but he was the one that was setting that like intensity and fire and like, willing to get after the umpires and willing to get in guys' faces. Like Tony Vitello is the guy who started that. And then his players bought into it and took the mantle. And then he kind of was able to be hands off after that.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And I think Elander probably is at some kind of a disadvantage because I think it would be easy to think that thing will just continue without me having to continue it. And you just hope he's self-aware enough that he can realize I'm going to have to do the hard work of identifying who the leaders are on this team and challenging them to be the leaders that they should be. Well, without them having to figure it out after we lose the regional to teams that we have no business losing to.
All right. Well, brother, if he hasn't figured it out now, I don't know what.
I don't think he ever will.
I don't think he ever will.
I totally agree. I guess I'm willing to say I don't know what it's like. Baseball is a particular kind of grind, and I think when the live bullets are flying week in and week out, and you're just stuck in like who's going to play what position, how are we going to manage our pitching rotations and stuff like that. That like once you're in it, that's probably not a thing that you're focusing on or thinking about a ton unless the wheels are absolutely falling off. And I don't feel like this team ever got to the place where you were like, the wheels are totally falling off. Like there were points where we as fans were like, are they going to make the postseason? But I don't think that was something that they were ever probably like super concerned about in the building is like, oh gosh, like, are we going to make the postseason? Like, I just think they kept kind of grinding through the season. So I'm just saying all that to say, I think it is something that post-mortem you should be able to figure out quickly. But I'd agree if he hasn't figured it out by, this coming weekend, then he probably never will.
Well, let me wrap this up with this comment because so with Jeff absent on the podcast tonight, I will take the role of the super negative Vol fan, and my full cards on the table is.
Wait, you think Jeff's negative?
Jeff has said he has said that on this podcast.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think he's the most negative?
I would say he's certainly the realist, the realist of the group. With him absent, let me say full cards on the table. I think that we have, Coach Josh Heupel 2.0, a guy who will be able to kind of draw in talent, never get the most out of it, and continually leave us disappointed because he's too much of a player's coach. There's nobody in the locker room holding the hard line. And I think that's what we can expect under Elander's tenure. That's just where I'm at.
So you're calling your shot.
Yeah, I'm obviously this is coming from an emotional place, having gone 0-2 in the regional. So maybe with weeks I can be more clear-headed. But why should we expect anything different? Why?
Yeah. I definitely think that's possible. The caveat that I would say that's not necessarily fatal is that like Phil Fulmer was a successful coach at Tennessee, and he was the same exact way. The times when he most floundered is when he didn't have a David Cutcliffe or a John Chavis who could be the hard butts, on the sideline. And to date, I think that it's still the best explanation for this football team under its current regime is that Gorsuch was that for us. Golish.
But he didn't have to coach. He didn't have to coach in the NIL era. Like, it's just, I don't know, man. I'm not sure that it's possible to be a Phil Fulmer these days. And again, I'm being super negative, but I just with the way.
I mean, does Kalen DeBoer strike you as a guy like that?
No, but they're not
players
as good.
Coach.
I mean, he doesn't strike me as a guy that's going to the locker room and
no, he's not.
Like, that's what I'm saying. And like they're making playoffs and they're successful. Ryan Day doesn't strike me as a guy like that. Like,
definitely not.
I think it can be done as long as you have people that can help you do that.
Joe, like Kurt Cignetti is, probably similar to that kind of guy.
Yeah,
that's right.
Kurt Cignetti is exactly what I had. You were as you were listing off those guys, I was like, yeah, but Kurt Cignetti is not. And he took like the programs that you just mentioned are perennial powerhouses that buy their teams, right? So like, is that us? Like, are we on that level? I don't think so. And so I don't see, a program that's kind of at the, fiscal level that we are at as far as what we spend and how we manage our resources. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think we're closer to Indiana than we are Ohio State. And you kind of using the analogy.
And so, football or baseball?
I'm taking the football analogy of like, so you take Ryan Day, right?
And then you're applying it to baseball though, right?
Yeah. So if you kind of using that as an analogy, right? The Ryan Days of the world versus the Cignettis of the world, our program is probably closer to an Indiana,
I disagree.
Which suggests to me that I think we need a Cignetti over a Day.
Maybe. I think Tennessee. I don't think there's that many teams out there in the country right now in baseball that are outspending Tennessee. I think that list is very short. I think Tennessee has.
We may be at the top. I honestly don't know.
I think you're probably. I realistically, I think
I
you're
think
a
it's
top
top
5
5.
program. Yeah. I mean, I'm not just trying to say that. Like Tennessee has the resources. They've won a recent national championship. They've invested in baseball. I think Tennessee is a top 5 baseball program, even with the bad season. I think that you are a modern blue blood baseball school, and there's a list of maybe 3 teams that are consistently outspending you, and they're also SEC teams. So it's like
the other teams in that category are like LSU, Arkansas, maybe Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all that's fair. I mean,
Mississippi State.
Would you say Vitello was more of a Signetti or more of a Day?
Oh, dude, Signetti. Vitello.
I mean, he's his own guy.
I know. We're putting him on a spectrum. He's his own man. But if you had to lean in one way or the other,
I guess I would go with Signetti just because he's more vocal and like hard,
Right.
But I do think Vitello was a player's coach in just a different way, I mean, Vitello honestly kind of if I had to compare him to like a football coach and the way he coaches, kind of reminds me of like, I hate to say this, but like
Lane Kiffin.
Kirby Smart or Lane Kiffin. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of who he reminds me of. Another guy, sorry, I don't want to keep just going, but another guy I kind of thought of like that's like I think a modern players coach who in football who like seems to get a lot out of his players, even though he's not like a hard ass, is like Dan Lanning. Like I think Dan Lanning seems to be the type of guy who like comes alongside his players and like is kind of a player's coach, but it seems like he also does get a lot out of them. But I'm also a little bit higher on Dan Lanning, like most people. So.
Oh, I love Dan Lanning.
Yeah.
Big Dan Lanning guy.
All right, so I'm the most negative on Elander. We can move on.
Yeah, but I don't think it's outlandish, though. I don't think your take's crazy. I mean, you could be proven right. We just all hope you're not. So.
And I think I also want to be clear.
Me too. I
want to be clear that you're also saying you're the most negative of all people who are also negative right now.
Yeah, right.
Like I don't think anybody's super high.
Yeah, that's true.
My only caveat is I do think it's possible to surround yourself with other guys and still be successful. True. That's all I'm saying.
Just for the listener's sake, to be clear, I'm not calling for Elander to be fired. I think max timeline of at least. I think Elander's probably got at least 2 years. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean
2 more.
Yeah, 2
probably.
More.
Yeah,
I think probably. He's got. I have a hard time thinking that he would be cut if let's say next season is kind of equivalent to this one.
Yeah, I think if he makes a postseason next year, he's fine.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah,
if he makes the postseason, he's fine. Yeah,
I would say the same.
Or wins it if you win an SEC tournament, you make the postseason. But like if he did really well in the SEC tournament, and since he had a great year, but somehow they just like didn't make the postseason because it played out, it's possible that scenario would buy him another year. But I don't know.
Yeah, but if they spend NIL money and they bring in a roster that's hyped up and they don't make the playoffs, I think that's the point where you're like maybe you don't get a third year. But
well, guys, let's jump into a look back on our preseason predictions. So we recorded this on February 4th. This is right before the season started. And there's some good quotes in here, some good predictions. Some of them were good. Some of them were terrible. And so I went back and listened to this episode just for fun, just to see, what we did and what we said. But anyways, we had the first big quote was Nick saying, of course, we're going to beat Wright State because Drew Gilbert is forever their daddy. That's a direct quote from Nick Duncan. I thought that was hilarious because obviously we all thought we'd beat Wright State. You weren't crazy for saying that, but it is ironic that you did say that and then we lost.
Isn't it ironic?
So that was the first quote. That was hilarious. That's all there was to it, was just that. I thought that was funny, and I wanted to bring it up.
Yes. I'm so glad that's on the record. Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it was a good one. So let's get into specific predictions that we made.
Sounded good at the time.
It did. It did sound good at the time. It was a great soundbite that just turned out to blow up in your
It's
face.
an
So,
ice cold take.
um, so our home series records, we went by home series and away series. Our home series records, we predicted. Nick said 4-1. Jeff also said 4-1. Max said 3-2. And Tennessee ended the year at home 3-2. So now you guys can say all kinds of nice things about me.
You are the king.
Who could contend with the great Mac when it comes to predictions? Not I.
Thank you. I appreciate.
I noticed
that.
I'm not quoted. Was I not on this episode?
You were not on this episode. Yep. So you get to.
Classic Joe.
Yeah. So you get to be free from any.
Hey, at least you don't have to hear your cold takes read back to you live.
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna get.
The
Of
whole
course.
world to hear.
I'm gonna get. Of course, we're gonna beat Wright State because Drew Gilbert is forever their daddy on a T-shirt. Quote Nick Duncan. I'm gonna get that on a T-shirt.
Never shows up in the podcast on a T-shirt.
Oh gosh, yeah. So moving on to road series, our road series record predictions. Nick said 3-2. Jeff went 5-0, and we're calling him negative. Jeff was 5-0. Max said 3-2, and our actual record was 2-3. So none of us got this one. We all were higher on the Vols on the road than they actually were. But it's so funny though because we didn't break it down series by series, but I don't think any of us would have predicted us to win the Mississippi State series, and you won that one. So if you'd have told me preseason, you're going to win the Mississippi State series on the road, you're going to sweep the Mississippi State series on the road, what's your road series record? I would have probably said 4-1.
4-1. Easy.
Yeah. But that was not the case.
Because that was the toughest road series.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. The next one was which returner takes the biggest step? So we had returners taking the biggest step. Me and Nick both said Levi Clark, and then Jeff said Stone Lawless. So we both said Levi Clark, Nick, but because you said Levi first, I went ahead and took a different option. So I need to go ahead and say this. I said Ariel Antigua would take the biggest step, which is the worst take of all of them because Ariel Antigua was a terrible player this year and he hit the transfer portal immediately. So I definitely deserve some flack for that. Now I will caveat it and say I did say Levi Clark first, but for the sake of being different, I went with something else and it screwed me. So
well, listen, it could have been worse. You could have said Brendan Krenzel.
Yeah, that's true. I could have said Braden Krenzel. So I wanted Levi Clark, Stone Lawless. Those are the two we had. Having the information you have now, was one of those the correct answer, or do we have a different returner that you felt like made a bigger step than one of those guys? Nick, what do you think?
Man, that's tough because they were also underwhelming.
Yeah.
Levi was really.
Sorry, I think there's an obvious answer.
Okay.
But I want you to go ahead.
Okay. Levi was really bad for a really long time, and then he was really good for the second half of the season. You think there's an obvious answer?
Yeah, for the guy that took the biggest step.
The biggest step. Yeah. I'm trying to think here. I don't think Levi took a step, so I don't think it can be him.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I think his was overall a step back. I mean, I think even after he improved the second half of the season, he was probably just about what he was all year last year.
Yeah.
So who took the biggest step forward? Someone on the pitching staff?
I think, yeah. So I think the most obvious answer is Manny Marin. And not because Manny Marin had a great season, but because Manny Marin was so unimportant last year and he was important this year and played pretty good defense.
Yep,
so I feel like he's the guy that took the biggest step. The other argument that could be made, I think, is the close second would be Tegan Kuntz. And again, Kuntz had not a great year, but because he was your ace this year and he did have some big games, he felt like the other answer that I would go with on the pitching staff.
Yeah, I thought Lawless played really well defensively this year. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
I don't.
The problem is he was overshadowed by Garrett Wright. Garrett Wright was the best catcher on the roster.
That's true.
And so
Yeah.
it
He's
made
a
it
dog.
it made it hard to
Yeah.
be like
My guy.
made it hard to be like, yeah, Stone's taking a great step. And his injury, like, Stone looked great against Georgia, but then he was hurt. So it was like, well, what do you do now? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's tough to take 90 off the face. So
Yeah, for sure. Joe, did you have a lean on one of those guys, or did you have a lean on somebody else?
No, I was thinking about it while Nick was thinking, and I didn't really. It's hard because it was so underwhelming. It was no one really stood out to me, but I actually think your point about Marin was good just in the sense that I know the player, and I don't even know that I knew he was a returning player. So that seems to suggest a step forward. If at the end of the season I know who you're talking about, and at the beginning of the season I wouldn't have known who we're talking about. So
right. Yeah. But again, a step forward is pretty relative with this team. So I'm not like saying Manny Marin had a great year or anything, but
sure.
Okay, and then so which newcomer will perform the best? Max said Cash Williams, who, by the way, did not play this year. Jeff said Henry Ford, and then Nick also said Henry Ford, but Nick took Garrett Wright because Jeff had taken Henry Ford, and so I wrote in the notes here that Nick stumbled into a great take. So Nick, congratulations on your take.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. He was my guy all year, and I think the most consistent player on the team all year long.
Absolutely.
And looked like the only guy that showed up that wanted to play this last weekend, in my opinion.
Joe,
Mr. Consistency. You can count on this guy. A ground ball with eyes. This man's gonna give you a ground ball with eyes at least twice a game. So.
Yeah, I like Garrett Wright as a pick. I really do. Just for the sake of argumentation, I think Jeff's pick about Henry Ford is also a really solid pick. I thought Henry Ford.
Yeah, and the argument about Ford though would be like, because apparently he got like sick in the year, like pneumonia or something, right? He got like pneumonia, and so he lost a bunch of weight and like obviously missed some games and stuff. But like, had that not happened, Henry Ford might be the guy that you're like, oh, he was the most consistent. Because I do think that Henry Ford pre-sickness was obviously
he's crushing the base.
He's just all over it. I mean, how many times did we get that Ford GIF sent in the chat? I like Henry Ford. Garrett Wright's probably the right answer, but I like Henry Ford as a close second.
I agree. Garrett Wright is the right answer. One thing I'm bummed about. Go ahead.
Those two guys were the best two players on this team this year, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Not from a talent perspective, but from a production perspective.
Perspective. Who do you and like? I mean, this is a stupid thing, but like situationally, who delivered in big moments? The answer to that question is not enough people did it enough times in the year. But the few times it did happen, it was one of those two guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't let Jeff know that I agree with him, though. I mean, that's just.
Well, he's going to listen to this tomorrow morning, and he's going to and say, "Thanks, buddy."
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'm bummed about is I just didn't know enough about Garrett Wright's game prior to the season, and that's my own fault. But I'm not just saying this. Garrett Wright is like the type of player that I strive to be when I played and that I most appreciate. Like one of my favorite players growing up that didn't like play for my favorite team or anything was Craig Biggio. Like I loved Craig Biggio. And I just like a gritty guy who will like take a hit by pitch and run to first and just, get on with the game. And like, that's who Garrett Wright is. Like, he's just a utility guy who's willing to do anything he's asked to do. And that's the kind of guy that I appreciate. And so had I known more about his game, I probably would have wanted to say him. But I just didn't know enough. And so that's on me. But Garrett Wright is a guy that I would love to see in a Tennessee uniform next year. Is there any chance that happens?
I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, I feel like because he is so versatile that he could get drafted. But I don't know how high he would be. I don't know what the money looks like, but I would love to see him play for Tennessee.
Yeah, I was about to say it probably just depends on how high he can go and, if he can get more money. And that's what it all comes down to now is just where's he going to get more money is probably the right answer there. So,
yep. Okay. The next of our takes was, and this is the last one here, was what defines a successful season? Nick said super regional.
Oh, God.
Max said, I'll go ahead and skip to mine because Jeff kind of had the best one that we can talk about. Max said Omaha. And then Jeff said, this is a quote: if they don't make a super, there will be blood in the water. I hope they have a good showing in a super. So that was Jeff's quote. So
Did he say anything about a bad showing in a regional?
yes, well, no. What he did say was, because when I said Omaha, he said, "Mac, I'm glad you said that because I think that you could see the same type of you know hostility from the fan base if we don't even make Omaha." So like a step back from what he even predicted. Do you guys
Mm-hmm.
think that's true? Is there blood in the water because we didn't make a super? What do you guys think?
I mean, I guess it just depends on what you mean by blood in the water. Like, I hear blood in the water, and I think they're calling for him to be fired, and I haven't seen a lot of that. Um, so I don't know, but I mean, it's obviously it's not good, and if this happens 2 years in a row, there definitely will be blood in the water. So I don't think the sentiment of his comment is wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Nick in the sense that even earlier when I was talking about what I think of Elander as a coach, I think even that opinion is still kind of a minority opinion. And frankly, it's probably true that there's just not enough data to really know one way or the other. And so blood in the water seems a bit we're probably not there yet. That's kind of a DEFCON level 4 situation that I don't think is necessarily true, but
Mm-hmm.
we're definitely headed in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's
So I would say
one of those
not
things.
yet.
We've talked about this before. I think a lot of it just depends on how things play out. And I think that this team was so bad for the first half of the season that everyone was just really happy to make the postseason. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think that there were a lot of fans that were like me that thought, I don't know, man, maybe they'll get out of the regional and make a super. And then when they didn't, it kind of brought back all the bad feelings that everybody had from the first half of the season.
Lower the bar, jump over the bar.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, I do think that losing a regional is like this could have been worse if they had won 20 games in the regular season and they were hosting a regional and they lose two in a row at home in Neyland. I think that the blood in the water thing would be even worse. So like in that scenario where it's like you can't even win two games at home after you had a good season, like it makes more sense what happened to Tennessee than like what's happened to UCLA and Virginia Tech or Georgia Tech, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
if we'd had a season like those two teams and then lost our regional at home, I mean, I'd
Mm-hmm.
be way worse off, I think, than I am now. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually. So yeah, the question here, the next question is, what do you think now? So like postseason, what defines successful season? What do you think now, based on all the data you have from the whole season? Like, do you think that a super regional or Omaha was still the definition of a successful season and therefore it was a failure? Or do you think that making the postseason was actually a more realistic successful season and it was, by all intents and purposes, a successful season? Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say it's not a successful season. I think you had enough talent and you showed enough um, of a caliber in this team that a super regional should not have been off the table. Certainly going over in a regional is a disappointment. And again, not to rehash everything, but I think it suggests that there's real problems in the coaching staff and the locker room and establishing the culture and the ethos. And so, I would say this season is a disappointment.
my preseason pick was to make a super regional. I did think this team would take a step back, which is why I wasn't as gung ho on that I thought they should make Omaha. I thought a super regional would have been appropriate. I think this team was talented enough to make a super regional. I think they should have made one, and so I think this season was a failure.
If Tennessee does not make Omaha, it will never, ever, ever, ever again be considered successful. That's where I stand. I can do no other. That's where I'm at. It's Omaha or bust every year. That's what it is. That's what Tony Vitello created. That's what this program is. That's what the fan base is. It's Omaha or bust. And I think the equivalent to Omaha, like I don't think the 64 team postseason is the same as making what is at this moment a 12 team playoff. I think making Omaha is more equivalent to the 12 team playoff. And that's maybe kind of obvious because of the amount of teams. But in just like I said that to say, just like football, if Heupel doesn't make a playoff, you're not thinking it was a great season. If Tennessee doesn't make Omaha, I don't think it's a good season, period. I mean, that's just simple as that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that sentiment going forward. I was willing to give a 1-year bump because I do think it's just generally true that anytime there's a new coach, there is a step back, and so that's why I
Sure.
said what I said earlier about this season. I think next year that my preseason goal will be Omaha.
So surprises and disappointments, and try and make your surprise like positive if you can. I just am curious. What was the biggest surprise, or maybe we should start with biggest disappointments. You could think about surprise. What was the biggest disappointment of this season? Could be specific with a player, or obviously just the team failed your expectations. But try and be more specific if you can. What was your biggest disappointment this year, Jeff? Or sorry, Jeff's not even on here. Nick, if you want to go first.
Yeah, biggest disappointment this year. I think. Obviously, like I'm trying to be too negative because like there are actually a lot of disappointments, but I
Sure.
think probably the biggest disappointment is that Elander wasn't more prepared to do things like manage pitching week in and week out, manage pitching for this regional. Made some, especially early on in the season, made some in-game decisions that I thought were odd and frustrating. Bunting at certain times, pulling pitches at certain times, not pulling pitchers at certain times, and just felt like he's been in the game long enough that he should have been better prepared for that. And so that was probably the biggest disappointment for me.
Yeah.
Biggest disappointment for me is that this team did not have enough grit, did not have enough moxie, did not have enough of the kind of cultural identity that we've come to expect in Tennessee baseball. That's true just generally, but as far as like where was that most obvious to me is the Vanderbilt series. You know that they are able to walk it off
3 times.
three times. Yeah,
right.
three. Right. To me, that is, I think that is probably like the that data point captures for me the problem with the whole season. Right? Enough talent to be in it until you give it away because you don't have whatever the X factor is and whoever's fault that is to go out there and beat the team. You let them walk it off on you 3 nights in a row. Just biggest disappointment.
Yep.
Man,
That's a
yeah,
good.
I like both y'all's answers a lot. I really, I was going to say, Nick, I think your answer is right, but Joe, I mean, I feel like yours is right as well. Those both are great. The one I would say, and mine's a little different angle than y'all's. The biggest disappointment for me, and again, I think y'all's are more right than mine, but the biggest disappointment for me was Blaine Brown. I really felt like he was going to be a way better player. He was touted as a way better player than what he played this year. He had a few moments, but they were very few, where you were like, man, that's the kind of guy that
Yeah.
we brought here. And I just felt like,
They have 14 home runs. How many of those came in midweek games?
yeah, a lot, most of them.
Well, if you kind of reframe the question to not necessarily like biggest disappointment from a 30,000 foot view, but like who didn't meet expectations, that's the right answer, I think, for sure.
Yeah. I definitely feel like he was the most disappointing individual player.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
Nailed that. Yep.
All right. So biggest surprise this season? Did anyone have anything that was like mildly positive? Like, oh, I was surprised this happened. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, biggest surprise for me was that we were the best defensive team in the SEC. Right? Yeah. I didn't have that on my bingo card. So,
yeah.
I think that's a positive. I think that, playing defense in baseball is a part of the game that nobody really talks. I shouldn't say nobody really talks about, but it's not sexy. It's not the sexy part of the game, right?
Which is
Hitting is
ridiculous. But yeah.
yeah. I'm with you. See, this is where you and I are the same because I love good defensive, like fundamental good defensive baseball.
It's the
right?
equivalent of hitting your free throws in basketball.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think that's right. And
Like it's not sexy, but if you can't do it, you're just generally not a very disciplined.
Yeah, but I don't know, guys. Like I struggle with the idea of saying it's not sexy too. Like you can't
well,
tell me like
for you and me, I think it is. I'm thinking about more just generally the way the culture views baseball. What is the part of baseball that is kind of the draw? I think it's that sinker that just drops out of the bottom of the zone. It's the crushed grand slam.
Well,
Right? Like
could I say it like this? Like most of the time, if you're watching Sports Center, the top 10 is going to be
right.
usually
defensive plays.
Oftentimes, but like the web gems is web gems on Baseball Tonight is more like for the baseball fan. So like the sexier thing, I think generally is a home run or a strikeout. I think Joe's right. And then I think like for the more dedicated baseball fans, like a nice, a 6-4-3 or a diving catch in the outfield or a robbed home run is.
Yeah, I would even put a robbed home run up there with a home run like that. That's because that's such a rare thing. But yeah, I'm thinking more of the fundamental stuff. The 6-4-3, right? It's gunning down a runner at second who's trying to steal. It's throwing out a guy. Throwing out a guy at home's kind of dramatic, so maybe that's more sexy. But anyway, not to digress on the language here, but back to my surprise, having us kind of lead the way on defense was not on my bingo. Like I know I missed the big prediction episode, but if I'd been on there, I would have thought, our path to success is going to be leaning on our young relievers and crushing the ball. Like that's our path to success. That's kind of what I thought going into the year. And that the only thing we did well was the one thing I didn't think we would do particularly well, which was play defense.
Nick, biggest surprise?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of retreading ground we've already talked about, but I think the biggest surprise for me was just how good Garrett Wright was at so many different things.
Yeah.
I just think he continued to impress me all year long, even through the regional when nobody else was impressing me. So that's my pick.
Yeah. Biggest surprise. Guys, there were so many things. I was like, oh, my biggest surprise was how bad the bullpen was. Wait, that's negative. My biggest surprise was I had to go through like 20 different things to like finally find something positive.
I'm only picking something positive as the biggest surprise because you asked me to.
I know. Even in this moment, I'm like, I don't even know what the biggest surprise to me was. I think I would have said Garrett Wright as well, and I'm trying to rack my brain of as far as something else. But I mean. Yeah, really no players. You didn't walk away from the season being like, wow, this guy, thinking about players, this guy surprised me other than Garrett Wright. So if you're going to go with a player, that had to be it.
Yeah, because you thought Henry Ford was going to be good.
Right.
You would assume that Manny Marin should be better.
Right.
Right?
Right. Exactly.
Garrett Wright's probably the only guy that exceeded expectations.
Absolutely. Maybe I'm just trying to this is my way backup option, but maybe another guy that surprised me in a positive way. Obviously, it's like, and so like Evan Blanco is close, but it's like I also expected quite a bit from him.
Yeah.
So maybe for me, Bo Rudy is the answer.
Yeah.
Or obviously maybe Cam Appenzeller. Like, is Cam Appenzeller, was he a lot better than expected him to be?
Mack on Sundays before he got hurt, maybe.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I feel like one of those guys is probably the answer. It depends on how high you were on Cam Appenzeller going into the year. We probably didn't talk about him enough going into the year, so that's probably the answer I'll go with. But I think expectations were high for him. So Bo Rudy maybe is the guy who like pitched best considering his expectations. But yeah, so. Yeah, that's all that. I did want to throw in one bit of bonus content, an extra take here that I remembered as we were talking.
Uh-oh.
So this is off the cuff. This is not a direct quote, but Joe was not on our prediction podcast, but Joe was on a podcast shortly after the season started, where Joe said something to the effect of, "I'm most excited for, or I'm most." Whatever. I can't remember the phrase he used, but let's just say I'm most excited for our young, talented bullpen is what Joe said, and our bullpen was probably the worst group on the team.
Boo this man! Boo this man!
Yeah, Joe did say that.
I did. I actually think I just
was half
mentioned.
Right. They are young.
I think I just sort of mentioned it, which is probably what jogged your memory. But I have been loathing that I said that out loud on a recording for so long. It was obviously the highest of retarded takes.
I'm going to get a T-shirt that says, "I'm most excited about our young, talented bullpen." Joe Davis.
Oh,
you heard it. You heard it here first, folks, and you never heard it anywhere else.
And you'll never hear it again.
Yeah. That's a rough one looking back.
That's the worst take.
Hey, listen.
I don't know. Ariel and Teague was pretty bad too. So
yeah, we all had bad takes, and it's just really, with all these bad takes, not our fault. This team should have been better.
You're right. You're right.
This team should have been better.
Yeah, it's the fault of the players and the coaches. That's whose fault it is.
Yeah, they let us down. So.
That's right. So I have a little bit of random postseason talk, and this is more just an opportunity for me to rant. But this did not matter at all in the regional. So I want to start with that. This had no bearing on the outcome of Tennessee season anyway. But I am still in this moment pissed off that Tennessee, when they played VCU, had to be the road team, even though they were the 2 seed and VCU was the 4 seed. Obviously, VCU beat us. They were the better team. I mean, they weren't, but they played better than us when it mattered. Yep. And so I'm not trying to take anything away from VCU at all. They earned their victory. Congrats to them. But it is dumb as crap that the higher seeded team has to play as the road team in a regional tournament. It blows my mind that North Carolina had to be the road team in one of their games, that Tennessee has to be the road team in one of their games, and that ECU would, in theory, had to have been the road team in one of their games against VCU. I do not understand this rule at all, and I want the NCAA to fix it.
Yep, it's dumb.
What is the motivation or the rationale behind it?
I'm not just saying this. It's a participation trophy. Okay. They, according to their rule, it's something along the lines of, because VCU was the road team in their game against North Carolina that they lost,
they get to be
Tennessee was the home team in their game that they lost against ECU. They flip. Because Tennessee's already been the home team once, they can't be the home team again. And because VCU was the road team, they can't be the road team again. It's crap. It's bull crap. They're the lower seed. They should be the road team in every single game they play.
Correct.
It doesn't make any sense at all. You should reward the teams that earned the spot of the higher seed in the regular season by letting them be the home team in their regional. It doesn't make any sense at all.
They have higher RPIs. They have higher RPIs. They played much more difficult schedules. There's no reason why VCU should be a home team against any team that's ranked higher than them.
Yeah. It's dumb. I
agree.
It's so retarded. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, it truly is. It's a fairness complex. They're like, oh, we have to make this fair. It's like, it doesn't. No, it's sports. They earned the higher seed. Let them be the home team. It's crazy.
Yep.
I don't.
Yeah,
You're lucky to be there, and it doesn't matter winners bracket, losers bracket, who was home yesterday, away yesterday. It doesn't matter. Higher seeds home always.
Yeah.
It's a tournament.
Is there anything comparable to that in any other sport? I can't even think of anything.
No, I mean, not that I know of. I mean, obviously, like college basketball, which is the most comparable style tournament, none of the teams are truly home teams because, right, you're playing at all neutral sites.
I mean, in football, you get a coin flip. Like in basketball, you get a jump ball. Like those things have always just generally been neutral in that way. But that's not true for baseball. if you're the home team, it is an advantage.
Yeah, it's an
And
advantage.
it's built into the game. And so why should a lower seeded team, like, why is North Carolina as a 1 seed at home ever the away team?
Yeah.
And they were on Saturday when they played ECU in the winners bracket. They were the road team.
I know. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech was an away team for one of their games in their regional.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely stupid. I hate it. Every year I'm reminded of how much I hate that freaking rule. It drives me crazy.
Yep, I agree. It's dumb.
So, guys, will you be watching any more postseason college baseball? Yes or no?
Yes. It's the best
yeah,
tournament in college sports.
Yeah, I if I don't, it won't be because I'm against it or I'm just done. We're pretty busy here in the next little bit, but yeah, I would like to.
Yeah. So who are you rooting for? And if you don't know all the options, I'll read them off to you real quick. The options are Georgia, Mississippi State, Texas, Oregon, North Carolina, Southern California, Auburn, Ole Miss, Kansas, Oklahoma, Alabama, St. John's, West Virginia, Cal Poly, Troy, and Little Rock. Who are you cheering for and why?
I'm probably
Nick, why don't you go first? Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Probably Mississippi State. For a couple of reasons. One, as you guys know, and maybe some of the listeners, my mother-in-law is a huge Mississippi State fan. She's a sweet lady who loves me a lot. So I like to pull for State when I can, when they're not playing the Vols. So for that reason, and then also the fact that we went to Mississippi State last year. They just had a cool culture, really enjoyed their fan base. Hard to not want to see them, be happy. And then, you get to say you swept the national champs, I guess. So,
yeah. Joe?
Dang, that's a good pick, buddy. I had not really given this question a lot of thought. So, just at a glance here, I guess I'd probably say Auburn. And I don't have a good reason for it.
Yeah. Okay.
I like Auburn's kind of similar to Nick, I guess. I like the culture at Auburn.
They lost their first game in the regional and battled back through the losers bracket. It was pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they had a tough regional. They had UCF and I'm trying to think of who else was in that regional.
State.
But yeah, NC State. Thank you.
Yeah, they won 17-14 game against NC State. That game was pretty wild.
Yeah.
Their skipper got threw out. That was a good one.
Yeah. Do you guys, so before I give my answer, because I don't really.
Skipper got thrown out. Sorry, let me correct myself.
No, you're good. Before I give my answer, because I don't really have one, really. I don't really care. Do you guys, you both picked an SEC team. Do you want to see an SEC team win the national championship with your own personal, feelings aside, family relation or just admiration for the traditions or whatever? Do you care about the SEC winning another national championship? I think the SEC's won, the last,
4 or the last 5?
Yeah, something like that. Do you want to see an SEC team win another one? Does that matter to you at all?
That doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Joe?
No.
Okay.
It just depends on the team. I never want to see Arkansas win a national championship in baseball.
They can't, so you're lucky.
Sure, I just can't stand them. Never want to see Vanderbilt. Never want to see Florida win a game in anything.
In anything.
That's kind of why I asked the question, because
kind of just depends on the team.
All the teams you're listing, LSU, Arkansas, Florida, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, maybe even, these are the teams I think of when I think of baseball teams I don't like in the SEC. None of them are options. That's why I wondered if maybe this year you were like, oh, given the options, I would like to see an SEC team win it.
No, not necessarily just on principle. I guess I wouldn't mind if most of the SEC teams that are left won. I wouldn't want Georgia to win just because I just don't like Georgia generally.
Yeah, that's the one team I would hate to see win on this list.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick a team, the match, Troy and Little Rock were two of the teams I said. One of those teams is going to Omaha.
I know.
One of those teams is going. So, that's awesome. So that's going to be 1/8 of your Omaha right there.
Yeah. Cal Poly has a chance.
Yeah, yes. Cal Poly plays West Virginia. West Virginia's got a pretty good team.
Yeah, they look good.
But Cal Poly definitely could win. So, and then St. John's playing Alabama. I would love to see the Johnnies beat Alabama. So, Go Johnny. So what are they? The red something, red
No
knights?
idea.
No,
No idea.
there. I can't think of it. The Red Storm. Red Storm. I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, the Red Storm.
I respect
Um,
it. Red Storm and the Crimson Tide. Interesting.
yeah, or it's red wave. It's red something, and it's not like an animal. It's like Red Storm or Red Wave or something
Sure.
like that.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so I'd like to see them. I guess if I had to pick a team on this list that I actually kind of care about, um, I probably would have picked. I probably would have picked Auburn. I mean, I know Joe already picked them. The other team I would have maybe picked is Mississippi State. So those were my two choices. You both already picked them.
There you go.
But yeah, so we're on the same page there. Anyone but Georgia, though, I'll definitely be cheering
Yeah,
for the
I
Bulldogs
feel that.
against the Bulldogs because I do not want to see Georgia make Omaha. So,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
all right. So, listener, thanks for listening to us as we grieve the baseball season. We're going to go ahead and give you a peek behind the curtain here of what's to come on the Volatile Podcast. So we are obviously entering the off season, but do not turn us off because we have a plethora of fun conversations to discuss this summer to carry you right into football season this August. Some things that we're going to talk about is all-time starting five under Rick Barnes. We're going to put together one of those for one of our faithful listeners, Will. So we're going to do that. We're going to start a segment called Rocky Top Roots, where we're going to talk about the history of Tennessee Volunteers and just all the stuff that goes into our history. We're going to do some top 10 Morgan Wallen songs, maybe some, other things like movies or sports moments or whatever. We're going to kind of do some fun stuff like that and a lot more. We're going to have something for you every week and obviously we'll be covering any Tennessee news that comes up or any of that stuff. That'll be what we lead with every episode, but we're also going to do some fun stuff, so make sure you tune in for that, just so you can get to know us a little bit better and get to grieve through the off season as we wait for football.
It'll be something to keep our minds off of wanting to physically harm ourselves while we wait for our true freshman QB to take the field. Oh my God.
Exactly.
Oh, we're so cooked. It's cooked.
Oh, I can't wait. It's going to be great.
Well, in light of the new stuff that's coming down the pipe in podcast in Volta podcast world here, we're going to do a new segment to wrap up the show tonight. This segment's going to be called Questions on College Football. So we will do this at some point in every episode. The first question that we're going to talk about tonight, and the only question, we'll just do one every show. So the question is, if you could be the coach of any program right now, excluding Tennessee, so you can't pick Tennessee, which would it be? If you could be the coach of any program, which would it be? Nick, you want to go first?
Yep. I would pick. I'm gonna say that I would pick a team in Florida. I think with Miami being the best team right now, I always just think that Florida and Texas, California are probably just high school football, some of the best states. I think the state of Florida is kind of ripe for the taking right now. With Florida and Florida State both kind of being down and Miami being up, I will never pick Florida, so I'll go with Florida State.
Nice. Joe, what about you, bud?
That's a good rationale, buddy. If I could coach any college football program right now, which one would I choose? I think I would take Auburn. I think I would take the Auburn job. Like the culture, like the opportunity to try to be the best team in the state.
Agree. Yep.
I think obviously there's a rich culture and heritage there, so I think that'd be helpful with recruiting. I think the student base is lively, obviously not as good as ours, but still they got a lot of support. I've seen a lot of Auburn fans in my days that are really faithful to really bad Auburn teams. I respect that. I like that. Kind of reminds me of being a Tennessee fan. So I don't know that I don't know what
You
Auburn's.
hate all the same people.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's just a lot of commonality there. I don't know that Auburn's got good prospects necessarily. So, I don't know that it's as good a pick as Florida State as far as how successful that program is going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. But yeah, I take Auburn.
Yeah, I think those are both good choices. I like Florida State better than Auburn. I will be honest and say Auburn's a tough choice because you got to play Alabama every year still. So
Yeah, but give them to me. I want it. I want it, and I want to beat them.
I respect that, but we'll see. I think the program I would choose to coach right now would be Texas Tech. Limitless resources.
Yeah, show me that money.
It's all about the money, boys.
Cakewalk, Big 12. You ain't got to play Texas no more. You ain't got to play Texas A&M no more. I think Texas Tech is one of the best jobs in the country as it stands right now. I know they got their problems with their gambling quarterback, but Brendan Sorsby, if you ever want to come on the podcast, bud, you're welcome anytime.
Hey, you can speak your side of the story.
Yeah, we'll be your outlet. You can tell us what actually happened, because I'm willing to believe the NCAA set you up. I'm willing to believe that. So, so I think I'm going with Texas Tech. They have some cool stuff they do. Some fun traditions and just the oil money. I mean, you can't beat the oil money. So that's what I'm going with.
It's pretty endless. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, that's a wrap for us tonight. Nick, why don't you go ahead and plug our socials?
You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on X at volatile_1998. You can find us on Apple Music and Spotify. And you do want to find us because otherwise, wandering through the desert like the children of Israel through what is going to be this summer, waiting on this football team to take the field with this schedule, you won't make it. You'll be wandering around the desert and you'll be seeing mirages of oases where people are going to make you think that, this quarterback is going to be the next coming of, T. Martin or Peyton Manning. And I just here to tell you, boys, it ain't happening. So you're going to want us to keep you grounded. And there's one thing you can count on us for. It's putting those orange tinted glasses on a little bit, mostly me. But then also having your more realistic friends to keep you grounded. So find us at those places, and we'll go through it together.
That's right. Yeah, listener. Moses never saw the promised land. He had Joshua who saw the promised land, but Moses did not. So just in case we all end up being Moses's and we are reminded that it's terminal, we'll be here for you. So signing off, it's terminal. Good to see you.